That night, amidst the clatter of plastic forks on paper plates at the annual Pinecrest Estates HOA potluck, the President Victoria Kane raised her glass to another quarter of invisible contributions. She announced, her eyes fixed on me. At least being invisible doesn't get in anyone's way. The community center roared with laughter. Only my brother Parker remained silent. He looked at me as if he were watching a slow-motion accident, knowing exactly who had laid the trap on the road. My name is Mara Quinn. At 34, I am the director of risk at a small insurance firm downtown, a title that sounds both important and impossibly vague, which is precisely how this neighborhood prefers it. I was 5 minutes late to the potluck, a fact that felt like a small, deliberate act of rebellion. The double doors of the rec center had slid shut behind me, releasing me from one glass and steel cage, only for me to drive across the manicured streets and willingly enter another. This one smelled of barbecue sauce, cheap wine, and the faint chemical tang of fresh-mowed grass. At the head of the long folding table sat Victoria Kane. She wasn't merely sitting. She was presiding. Her posture as rigid and unassailable as a judge's. Her silver-streaked bob perfectly coiffed. Her jaw set. This wasn't a friendly neighborhood dinner. It was a quarterly performance review, and we were all her underlings. I slid into the empty chair between Parker and Aunt Carol. An apology for my tardiness died on my lips as Victoria caught my eye. She gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture that said, "I have noted your infraction. We will proceed, but it is on the record." Her husband, seated to her right, offered me a tight, placating smile. His role, as always, was to smooth the jagged edges of Victoria's personality, to be the velvet glove on her iron fist. The volunteer servers, moving with practiced stealth, filled my plastic cup with lukewarm white wine. The air was thick with the low hum of obligatory conversation. Neighbors boasting about their new sod. Cousins discussing the latest vacation none of us could afford the time to take. It was a symphony of polished surfaces, a performance of suburban bliss we had all rehearsed for years. Victoria tapped her fork lightly against her glass, and the room fell silent. The sudden quiet was absolute, a testament to her gravitational pull. She held her wine cup aloft, the stem pinched between thumb and forefinger, her gaze sweeping the tables before it landed inevitably on me. A toast, she began, her voice a smooth contralto that had shut down complaints and crushed dissent for a decade. To my favorite resident director, a woman in leadership. It's the trend of the year, after all. A ripple of polite, uncertain laughter went around the room. It was a classic Victoria Kane maneuver. A compliment wrapped around a core of pure condescension. She made my quiet work sound like a fashionable accessory she'd allowed me to wear. I held her gaze, my expression carefully neutral. Parker beside me shifted slightly in his chair, but Victoria wasn't finished. She took a sip, savoring it as she savored the moment. Then came the hook. I had already felt the one she had been baiting all evening. That night, amidst the clatter of plastic forks on paper plates, Victoria raised her glass to another quarter of invisible contributions. She announced, her eyes fixed on me. At least being invisible doesn't get in anyone's way. The room roared with laughter. This time it was genuine, unrestrained. Uncle slapped the table. Aunt Carol let out a high-pitched whistle. And the cousins joined in, as if on cue, a pre-recorded laugh track for my public humiliation. The joke was that my work building complex preventative risk models for neighbors' home insurance wasn't tangible. It didn't result in a new flagpole with my name on it or a splashy headline in the Pinecrest Gazette. My successes were silent, measured in disasters that never happened. To Victoria, a woman who measured worth in perfectly edged lawns and visible compliance, my career was a ghost, a phantom of real achievement. Amidst the chorus of amusement, Parker set his fork down. The small sound of metal on ceramic was sharp, precise, a period at the end of their sentence. He didn't say a word. He just looked at me. His lips pressed into a thin, hard line. It was a look I knew better than my own reflection. It was his signal, the one he deployed whenever he witnessed someone crossing an unspoken boundary, whenever he saw an injustice, small or large, being committed. His silence was a shield, a quiet dissent that was louder than all their noise. I forced a smile, a thin, brittle thing I could feel cracking at the edges. The perfect retort formed in my mind, sharp and lethal. The neighborhood's biggest risk isn't the dandelion's Victoria, it's the one who thinks she's an asset but is actually a liability. Funnily enough, she's often sitting right here at the head table, but I swallowed it, pushing it down with a sip of acidic wine. To speak it would be to detonate the bomb and suffer the fallout. Victoria's world had one rule. She was never to be challenged, especially not in front of her audience. Just then, a vibration against my leg. My phone. I glanced down, slipping it from my purse under the table. The screen lit up with an email notification. The subject line was stark: formal complaint regarding yard compliance metrics. My blood ran cold. It was from an anonymous address, a disposable Proton account, but it was CC'd to the two people who could ruin my standing with a single keystroke: the HOA treasurer and the community attorney. My thumb trembled as I opened it. The text was brief, clinical, and devastating. It accused me of manipulating my own risk assessment data, of intentionally rigging the compliance indicators to artificially inflate the success of my informal neighbor help protocols and, by extension, my own standing. It was a lie, a sophisticated one, but a lie nonetheless. My systems were built on immutable logs. Tampering was impossible, but in the world of HOA accusation, the stain of the charge is often enough to do permanent damage, whether it's true or not. I looked up from my phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. Across the table, Victoria was watching me. The laughter had died down, but a smirk still played on her lips. She slowly, deliberately picked up her own phone, which had been lying face down beside her plate. She tapped the screen, angled it just so, and slid it across the folding table toward me. On her screen was a screenshot of the exact email I had just received. "You should be more careful, Mara," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Yet it cut through the lingering murmur of conversation. It wasn't advice. It was a threat. In that moment, a strange sensory collision happened. I could smell the sharp floral notes of her signature perfume mingling with the rich, spicy aroma of grilled chicken on her plate. The combination was suddenly nauseating, a mixture I knew I would forever associate with this precise moment of betrayal, this cold, calculated act of neighborhood sabotage. She hadn't just stumbled upon this. She had orchestrated it. She was the anonymous source. The room felt like it was tilting, the walls closing in. The faces of my neighbors blurred into a meaningless tableau of smiling masks. They were all in on it. If not in deed, then in spirit. They were the willing spectators to my execution. My hand was shaking under the table. Another vibration. It was Parker. I glanced down, my vision swimming. A single line of text glowed on the screen. "Don't say anything. Observe." The words were a lifeline, an anchor in the spinning chaos. He was right. Reacting now with anger or tears was what Victoria wanted. She wanted a scene. She wanted me to lose control, to prove her unspoken thesis that I was too emotional, too unstable for the quiet influence I held. Parker's message was a splash of cold water, a tactical command from my only ally. I took a slow, deep breath, the air tasting of cheap wine and deceit. I looked at the screenshot on Victoria's phone, then at her expectant face. I pushed the phone back across the table to her. I picked up my fork, my movements measured and calm. I met her gaze, holding it for a long, silent moment. And then I took a bite of my food, chewing slowly, deliberately. I would not give her the satisfaction. I would not break. I would observe. And I would remember. The drive home from the rec center was a steady and controlled motion. My hands were steady on the leather-wrapped steering wheel. My foot applied even pressure to the accelerator, and my eyes remained fixed on the slick, rain-glossed ribbon of asphalt unwinding before me. But inside, a tectonic shift was occurring. The carefully constructed continent of my life was fracturing, revealing the molten, hostile magma beneath the polished surface I had mistaken for solid ground. Pinecrest Estates. We were a beautiful photograph with a cracked glass frame. And tonight Victoria Kane had pressed her thumb directly onto one of the fissures. Victoria Kane's sermons on true community standards had become the unofficial liturgy of every HOA gathering. She had sold her landscaping company to a massive conglomerate a decade ago. The sale had made her wealthy, but it had robbed her of her kingdom. So she rebuilt it at the head of the folding tables. She was no longer a CEO. She was a philosopher queen dispensing wisdom forged in the crucible of a success that was now 10 years in the past. She would lean back swirling a plastic cup of wine and talk about vision and guts and the killer instinct. She spoke of the neighborhood as a battlefield, a place where women made their mark. Her lectures were directed at everyone but were always somehow about me. They were a constant implicit critique of my own path, my own quiet data-driven world. And her husband was her high priest. His talent was a form of social alchemy. He could take the lead weight of Victoria's public humiliations and spin them into gold. "She's just trying to motivate you, dear," he'd murmur later, placing a cool hand on my arm. "She sees your potential and wants to push you." He was the chief operating officer of our fragile neighborhood piece, managing gazes and refilling cups, expertly turning a blatant insult into a character-building exercise or a funny little joke. He was the one who taught me how to smile when I was bleeding, to say thank you for a wound. He saw his role not as a defender but as a polisher of the blade, ensuring the community image remained spotless even if it was stained with blood behind closed doors. Parker was the apostate. At 28, he was the only one who had successfully defected. He'd looked at the blueprint for a Pinecrest Sun MBA, a seat on the junior committee, a life spent in the shadow of Victoria's legacy, and had set it on fire. He'd taken a small inheritance from our grandmother and built a sound studio in a converted warehouse on the edge of town. It was a place of brick and exposed pipes, of tangled cables and the warm hum of vintage amplifiers. It was everything our cul-de-sac was not, real, messy, and creative. Victoria called it Parker's little hobby, a dismissive phrase that was her only weapon against a resident she could no longer control. Parker didn't play her game, so Victoria pretended he wasn't on the board. I, on the other hand, had tried to play. I had tried to win on my own terms. My ascent in the neighborhood was built not on loud pronouncements or risky gambles but on the silent, methodical construction of a fortress. I designed our informal vendor stream control model, a system I privately called Risk Gates. It was an intricate network of automated checks and balances that analyzed every potential third-party contractor, flagging fraudulent bids, compliance inconsistencies, and potential security breaches before they could cost homeowners a dime. It was preventative medicine in a world that only valued surgeons. My successes were invisible. The six-figure lawsuit that never happened, the data breach that was averted, the fraudulent landscaper who was never paid. To the neighborhood, this was just paperwork. At last year's Christmas block party, my uncle had clapped me on the back and boomed, "So Mara, still pushing papers around for those insurance folks." Victoria had smiled benignly, adding, "It's important work. Someone has to check the boxes." There were no ribbon-cutting ceremonies for my achievements. My victories didn't come with press releases or champagne toasts. They were quiet, digital, and in the Pinecrest ledger, utterly without value. This was all part of the central, suffocating paradox of Victoria's teachings. From the time we could speak, she had drilled one mantra into Parker and me. Don't ever owe anyone a thing. It was a lesson in fierce independence, or so I thought. But the truth was, she spent her entire life ensuring we were both hopelessly in her debt. The tuition for the private community events was not a gift but a loan to be repaid with deference. Her connections that opened doors for first interviews were not favors but chains she could rattle whenever she chose. Every piece of advice, every gesture of support came with an invisible invoice payable in obedience. We were never allowed to be in debt to outsiders because she needed to be our sole creditor. Her need for control was absolute. Throughout my time in Pinecrest, at every committee I'd served on before, she had always had her sources, a casual mention over coffee. "Heard your quarterly compliance numbers were soft, Mara," a friend of mine on the board mentioned it. It would reveal that the walls of my little home office were in essence made of glass. She cultivated a network of older women, her contemporaries, who saw her inquiries as a professional courtesy. To them, she was just a concerned president keeping tabs on her residents. To me, it felt like I was living under constant surveillance. My every move reported back to headquarters. It was this creeping sense of being watched that triggered the risk analyst in me. My profession is about identifying threats, quantifying them, and building systems to mitigate them. A few years ago, I began applying that methodology to my own life. I started a private encrypted file on a secure drive. In it, I documented everything. The backhanded compliments, the humiliating public remarks, the veiled threats, each with a date, a time, and a list of witnesses, a text message from her after I was promoted. Don't get comfortable. The view from the top is clear, which means you're an easy target. A recording of a voicemail she left after I lost a bid on a small shed she wanted me to buy. Weakness in negotiation is a cancer, Mara. It starts small. It became a habit, a reflex. I was building a case file without knowing who I would ever present it to. It was my own private, invisible work, my own risk gate against Victoria. I remembered a conversation with Parker about a year ago. We were sitting on the worn leather couch in his studio, the smell of ozone in the air. He had just finished mastering a track for a local band, and he was staring into the colored waveforms on his monitor. You know, he said, not looking at me. I think she uses you. What do you mean? I'd asked, defensive. She uses you like a secret listening device. She plants you inside these committees, then uses her network to pull information. She gets a feel for their internal health, their weaknesses. She's not just watching you, Mara. She's watching through you. I had dismissed it as paranoia, the natural suspicion of the neighborhood's only exile. It sounded too conspiratorial, too much like a suburban thriller. Victoria was controlling. Yes, she was manipulative, certainly, but to use her own resident as an unwitting corporate spy, it seemed a step too far even for her. I told Parker he was being overly dramatic. He just shrugged and said, a woman who builds a cage thinks everyone else is a bird. Until tonight. Sitting in my car, the engine idling silently, I replayed the scene at the potluck, the anonymous email, the CC to treasurer and attorney, and the screenshot on Victoria's phone. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a lucky find. It was a message. She wasn't just watching me anymore. She had escalated from surveillance to active sabotage. Parker hadn't been paranoid. He had been prophetic. The anonymous email wasn't just an attack on my standing. It was Victoria's hand reaching directly into the heart of Pinecrest, using a perfectly crafted lie to me. The question was no longer if she was behind it, but why. And as the rain began to fall harder, drumming a frantic rhythm on the roof of my car, the cold, terrifying answer began to take shape. This was not just about control. This was about a deal, and I was in the way. The summons arrived at 8:15 a.m. via a calendar invitation with no description, simply titled Urgent Matter, and located in the glass-walled community room on the second floor of the rec center. The attendees were listed as myself, Victoria Kane, the HOA attorney, and the senior treasurer. It was the suburban equivalent of being called to the principal's office, only the consequences were infinitely more severe than detention. The room was an exercise in minimalist anxiety. From this high up, the cul-de-sacs below looked like a circuit board, a network of orderly and different lights. The attorney, a man whose spine seemed to have been replaced by a steel rod, sat opposite the treasurer, whose carefully cultivated empathy was a well-known tactic, a velvet pillow to soften the HOA axe. Mara, thank you for coming on such short notice, the treasurer began, her voice smooth and practiced. The attorney cut straight to the point. We've received a formal complaint, he said, his tone flat, betraying no emotion. There are allegations of impropriety regarding the new landscaping contract, specifically that you have been manipulating compliance coefficients to artificially enhance the performance metrics of your risk-gate protocols. He used the exact phrasing from the anonymous email. They weren't investigating a vague tip. They were acting on a prepared script, Victoria's script. I kept my composure. My training as a risk analyst kicking in. This was a threat assessment. I needed data. I see. May I know the source of these allegations? It's an anonymous submission, but it contained enough specific detail to warrant our immediate attention, the treasurer said, her gaze unwavering. The details are incorrect, I stated, my voice steady. I opened my laptop and navigated to the system's back end, projecting the audit dashboard onto the large screen on the wall. This is the live audit log for the risk-gate system. As you both know, it's built on an immutable ledger. Every single action, every query, every data point modification is logged, timestamped, and cryptographically signed. You can see the hash chains right here. Nothing can be altered without breaking the chain and triggering a level 1 security alert across the entire committee. There have been no such alerts. I pointed to the landscaping vendor assessment module. The coefficients for the new contract have not been touched since they were finalized 3 weeks ago. Here is the digital fingerprint of the tool that signed them into the system. It belongs to me. Yes, but the timestamp proves it was done on September 23rd. There have been 0 subsequent modifications. I had laid out my defense. It was airtight, logical, and based on the unassailable mathematics of the very system the neighborhood had paid me in quiet favors to build. I had shown them the truth. The attorney was unmoved. He slid a tablet across the polished table. We're aware of your system's integrity, Mara. The allegation is not that you used our systems to commit the fraud, but that you communicated your intent to do so externally. On the screen was a screenshot of an email. My signature was at the bottom. My professional headshot beside it. The recipient was a dummy address. The body of the email was a short damning paragraph coldly discussing a plan to nudge the landscaping numbers to ensure a flawless Q4 report for my department. It was a perfect forgery, almost. My eyes darted to the sender's address at the top. It read mquinpinecresthoa.com. It was missing the final S. A single tiny fatal error that a casual observer would miss, but a clear indicator of a spoofed domain. This is a fabrication, I said, my voice rising slightly. Look at the domain. It's misspelled. This email did not come from me. It didn't even come from our servers. We're aware of the discrepancy, the attorney said coolly. Then you must know it's fake. Trace the IP address of the sender. It will prove it wasn't me. The treasurer folded her hands on the table. Our cybersecurity volunteer is looking into it, she said, the slight hesitation telling me everything I needed to know. They weren't looking into it. They were burying it. However, Mara, the gravity of the situation with the new landscaping contract, our largest vendor, means we cannot afford any perceived instability. The board has been notified. The trap was closing. The evidence of my innocence was irrelevant. The accusation itself was the weapon. Therefore, the attorney continued, his voice the final nail in the coffin. We've decided it's in the best interest of the community to place you on temporary paid administrative leave effective immediately pending the outcome of our internal investigation. Paid leave, the suburban purgatory. I was to be locked out of my systems, my email, my committee access. I was being isolated from the very tools I could use to defend myself. You'll be escorted to your home to collect your personal belongings, the treasurer added, her empathetic mask finally slipping to reveal the cold steel beneath. Please leave your laptop and community tablet here. The walk to my car, with a silent security volunteer trailing me, was the longest walk of my life. Heads turned, whispers followed me down the sidewalk. In the space of 15 minutes, I had gone from quiet helper to pariah. As I stood in the elevator, its silent descent mirroring my own, my personal phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Parker. I answered, my throat tight. Hello, don't go home, he said, his voice urgent, stripped of its usual laid-back cadence. Victoria might be watching the street. Come to the studio. Use the back entrance. The command was so specific, so certain that I didn't question it. I directed my car to the industrial edge of town. Parker's studio was a sanctuary of warm wood and soft lighting. He met me at the door, his expression grim, and led me past a mixing board to the small lounge area. He didn't ask what happened, he already knew. He handed me a pair of high-fidelity headphones and queued up an audio file on his monitor. I got a call last night, he said quietly. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but I've been recording all incoming calls on that line for the past 6 months just in case. Listen. I slipped the headphones on. There was a brief crackle, then a voice. A voice I knew better than my own. It was Victoria Kane. The audio was crystal clear, professionally captured. It's done, the voice said. Push the file to the treasurer first thing in the morning. She won't see it coming. And get ready. The landscaping stock is about to get hot. My hand holding the headphones to my ears began to tremble violently. It wasn't just the confirmation. It was the language. Push the file. That was her phrase. Her private suburban vernacular for launching an attack. For initiating a hostile play she'd been planning for months. It was the same term she'd used just before a competitor of her old company suddenly found themselves buried in a baseless code violation inquiry. I pulled the headphones off, my breathing ragged. I looked at Parker, my eyes wide with a dawning, sickening horror. It all clicked into place, the pieces of the puzzle assembling themselves with brutal, unforgiving logic. The new contract, I whispered the name, tasting like ash. Their negotiation was tough. The one sticking point was my risk gate protocol. Their preferred vendors couldn't pass the initial screening. They argued it was too stringent, that it would slow down their supply chain. Parker listened intently, his focus absolute. I held firm. I continued thinking aloud, my analyst's mind piecing together the plot against me. I had the board's backing. If I'm suspended, discredited, the first thing the landscaping lawyers will do is demand the removal of the risk gate clause, calling it the product of a compromised resident. They'll say it's a liability. I stood up and began pacing the small room. And once the gates are gone, it opens a path. A path for a vendor who couldn't get through before. A vendor with connections. My blood ran cold. Harrington Landscaping. Their initial bid was rejected 3 months ago for compliance red flags. Victoria is on their advisory board. I didn't even know until I saw it in a footnote on their annual report. She wasn't just trying to control me or humiliate me. This wasn't just a cruel neighborhood power play. This was a multimillion-dollar corporate raid, and I was the obstacle she had to remove. She had leveraged her own resident, risked her entire standing for a business deal. The stock comment. She was planning to short the landscaping stock, betting on the instability my suspension would cause then profit again when Harrington got the contract. I stopped pacing and faced my brother. The full monstrous weight of the betrayal settling upon me. The woman who had positioned herself as the neighborhood mother had just tried to break me for profit. Parker's voice was low and hard, shearing through my shock. He looked at me, his eyes clear and resolute, and said the words that would change everything. Mara, this is no longer a neighborhood matter. Parker's words hung in the air of the studio. Stark and absolute. This is no longer a neighborhood matter. He was right. The moment Victoria used a forged email to trigger a committee investigation, she had ceased to be a president in any functional sense. She had become a hostile actor, a risk. And my entire standing, my entire life had been about one thing: mitigating risk. The shock that had frozen my blood began to recede, replaced by the cold, familiar hum of professional focus. The resident was on administrative leave. The risk analyst was clocking in. Victoria had made a critical error. She, a woman of bluster and boardroom coups, saw the world as a chessboard of powerful women making bold moves. She didn't understand that the new world, my world, was run on code. It was a place of protocols and immutable ledgers where a single well-placed line of text could be more powerful than an army. She thought she was playing chess, but I had been laying mines. 3 months ago, during the final brutal stages of the landscaping contract negotiation, their legal team had fought me tooth and nail over my risk gate protocols. They wanted exceptions. They wanted backdoors for their legacy vendors. I saw the pressure they were under and the pressure they were applying, and I anticipated a future problem. So I conceded on a minor point, a gesture of goodwill, and in return I buried a weapon deep in the appendices. It was designated Appendix R12, a single page of dense legalese I had drafted with a friend from law school who specialized in corporate warfare. We called it the Reverse Exposure Clause. On its surface, it was a standard compliance guarantee, but its core function was that of a defensive poison pill. The clause stated that in the event of intended external manipulation aimed at illegally circumventing or disabling the risk gate protocols, the entire contract would automatically trigger a series of catastrophic events. First, a cross-penalty provision would be activated, fining the instigating parties and associated vendors. Second, and far more importantly, it mandated an immediate non-discretionary report to the relevant financial and cybersecurity regulatory bodies, complete with all supporting data. It was designed to turn a quiet internal sabotage attempt into a public regulated inferno. The clause, however, had a specific and demanding trigger condition. Could only be activated by incontrovertible proof. The manipulation had to be intentional. It had to be external, and it had to be linked directly or indirectly to a party that stood to gain a vendor-related benefit from the contract. Victoria, in her arrogance, had just hand-delivered all 3 conditions. I possessed the keys to unlock the arsenal. The first key was the proof of my innocence, the system's own audit logs, the immutable hash chains that proved the landscaping coefficients had never been touched. The second key was the proof of the forgery itself. This was my private masterstroke, a trap I had set for a ghost I wasn't even sure existed until now. The fake email Victoria's operative had created used a simple plaintext signature, Mara Quinn, resident advocate. It was designed to look plausible, but last week, in a move that had seemed like professional paranoia, I had completed the process of legally registering my official cryptographic digital signature with a certified authority. My real signature was a unique, verifiable block of code. The signature on the forged email was, by legal definition, a fraudulent document. The email wasn't just a lie. It was a prosecutable offense. But that was all circumstantial. Proved the attack, but it didn't definitively name the attacker. I needed the final key, a direct link between Victoria Kane and the offer of undue advantage. I needed her voice. I needed a confession. I turned to Parker. The grim set of his jaw told me he had already reached the same conclusion. I need you to set up a pipeline, I said. The words coming out clipped and precise, legally airtight. I need to record every call, every message, every interaction I have with her from this moment forward. I need a chain of custody for the data that will stand up in court. Can you do it? Parker, a man who understood the intricacies of state-by-state consent laws for recording better than most lawyers, simply nodded. I'll use a triple redundant cloud-based server with rolling timestamp backups. Anything she sends you forward to a dedicated email. Any call goes through a new registered number I'm about to buy, it will be clean. The plan formed cold and clear. I would be the bait. I took out my personal phone and composed a text to Victoria. We need to talk. I don't understand what happened. I added a touch of vulnerability, a note of confusion to appeal to her sense of superiority. I'm at a loss. Her reply was almost instantaneous. Of course. Let's have coffee. Your choice. She was confident, smug. She believed I was coming to her as a broken resident seeking an explanation or perhaps begging for mercy. She would never suspect I was coming as an auditor. River Light Cafe. I texted back. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. The following morning, I walked into the cafe, a glass and chrome establishment overlooking the river. It was neutral ground, bright and open, the opposite of the dark paneled room where she had ambushed me. I chose a small table near the window. I took out my phone, connected to the cafe's guest Wi-Fi network, and activated the screen mirroring app Parker had installed miles away in his soundproof studio. My brother was now seeing everything on my screen and recording it. Victoria arrived precisely at 9 o'clock, dressed in a tailored cashmere coat, looking every bit the benevolent president. She ordered an espresso while I asked for a simple black coffee. The pleasantries were brief, a thin veneer of civility over the gaping chasm between us. She leaned forward, her voice a low, confidential murmur. Mara, I know you're hurt, but you need to see the bigger picture. Pinecrest was holding you back. I played my part. What picture? Victoria, I was suspended. My standing is on the line because of a lie. She sighed. A theatrical display of presidential disappointment. She was enjoying this. The power to dismantle my life and then offer to rebuild it in an image of her own choosing. She decided it was time to present her generous offer, the solution to the problem she had created. It doesn't have to be, she said smoothly. This is an opportunity, a correction. If you step back, if you resign from your informal committee quietly and cite personal reasons, this whole investigation disappears. And Harrington Landscaping, they have a great deal of respect for your talents. They've authorized me to tell you that a vice president of strategy position will be made available to you. There it was, the quid pro quo, the offer of undue advantage, the final key turning in the lock. She was offering to bribe me with a job at the very company that stood to benefit from my professional demise. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, letting Parker's recorders capture every damning syllable. I looked out the window at the gray water of the river. Then I met her gaze. My voice was devoid of emotion. The question of a risk analyst, not a resident. Have you placed your bets yet, Victoria, on the landscaping stock? For the first time, a flicker of surprise of irritation crossed her face. I had deviated from the script of the broken child. I had asked a question from her world, the world of finance and predation. She recovered quickly, a condescending smile spreading across her lips. Mara, she chuckled, shaking her head, as if explaining a simple concept to a toddler. When women are playing chess, you shouldn't try to invent new rules for the pawns. I held her gaze. The insult didn't touch me. It was just more data, more confirmation of her intent, her motive, her all-consuming arrogance. She saw me as a piece on her board to be sacrificed. She had no idea I was the one controlling the game. I picked up my coffee cup, the ceramic warm against my fingers. At that exact moment, I felt a faint vibration from the phone in my pocket. I didn't need to look. I knew what the message from Parker would say. Enough. I raised the cup to my lips. The bitter taste of the coffee, a welcome clarifying shock to my system, tasted like victory. The elevator ascended in unnerving silence. A glass box rising through the spine of the rec center. 40 floors in 45 seconds. With each passing level, the pressure in my ears built a physical manifestation of the crushing weight of the moment. I stepped out into the hushed carpeted lobby of the executive suite. The air here was different, rarefied, filtered, smelling of nothing but power. The conference room was exactly as I had pictured it, a tomb of glass and steel suspended in the night sky. 3 of its walls were floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing a panorama of the neighborhood dissolving into the rain. Water streamed down the panes in undulating ribbons, distorting the lights below into a glittering abstract canvas. It was beautiful and violent, a fitting backdrop for the evening's proceedings. At the center of the room was a vast black marble table so polished it reflected the storm outside like a dark, still lake. Seated at its head was Elaine Morton, the HOA CEO equivalent. She was a woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and a severe haircut that suggested she had no time for frivolity. She watched me approach, her expression unreadable behind a pair of thin, steel-rimmed glasses. To her right sat the attorney and to her left the audit chair. They were the tribunal. I took my seat at the far end of the table, the designated spot for the condemned, and placed my laptop before me. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint rhythmic drumming of rain against the glass. The door slid open with a soft hiss and Victoria walked in. She was not cowed. She was not defensive. She entered the room with the easy proprietary air of a woman who believed she owned any space she occupied. She was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, her silver hair catching the light. She wasn't here as an accused party. She was here, as I would soon learn, in her official capacity as an external consultant to the board, a vague honorific title they had given her years ago as a professional courtesy. It was a Trojan horse, allowing her to be inside the very room where her fate was being decided, and behind her, a step behind and to the left like a shadow, was her husband. He carried a leather portfolio and a pen as if he were here to take minutes. But I knew his true purpose. He was human collateral. He was here to remind everyone in the room that this wasn't just a corporate matter. It was a neighborhood matter. His presence was a silent plea for discretion, for civility, for a solution that didn't involve torches and pitchforks. He was the velvet glove deployed to hide the brutality of the iron fist. Victoria took a seat halfway down the table, a strategic position between me and the CEO. Her husband sat beside her, his back perfectly straight, his hands folded on the black marble. He gave me a brief, pleading look. "Don't do this, Mara." The audit chair cleared her throat. "Thank you for coming. We are here to discuss a matter of extreme sensitivity. Ms. Quinn, you have invoked Appendix R12 of the landscaping contract, citing intended external manipulation. The floor is yours to substantiate this claim." This was it. I connected the USB drive to my laptop, and the first of my 7 slides appeared on the massive screen at the end of the room. It was a simple timeline. Its sterile sans serif font a stark contrast to the emotional storm in the room. On July 12th, I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified slightly by the room's acoustics. Harrington Landscaping submitted a vendor bid that was rejected by the risk gate protocol for compliance failures. On October 8th, I received a fabricated email sent to key members of the HOA leadership alleging professional misconduct on my part. The following morning, I was placed on administrative leave. Victoria shifted in her seat, a flicker of annoyance in her eyes. This was not the emotional outburst she had expected. This was a clinical presentation. I clicked to the next slide. It showed the forged email. The sender's address, pinecresthoa.com, highlighted in red. The document used to suspend me was a forgery. The domain is misspelled. It is by legal definition a fraudulent instrument, a clerical error. Perhaps Victoria interjected, her voice smooth and reasonable. She addressed her comment not to me but to the CEO. Elaine, you know how these things are. Mara is under a great deal of pressure. It's possible she sent it from a personal device and made a mistake. The email did not originate from any of my devices, I stated, not looking at her. Its IP address originates from a server farm in a jurisdiction known for hosting anonymous shell accounts. I clicked to the next slide, which showed the IP trace data. Furthermore, it was sent at 10:47 p.m. on Tuesday night. At that exact time, I was at the potluck and my phone was on the table untouched. I advanced to the next slide, which showed a waveform of the audio Parker had captured. Beneath it were the transcribed words, "Push the file to the treasurer first thing in the morning. The landscaping stock is about to get hot." This, I said, is a recording of an external party discussing the fabricated email and a plan to capitalize on the resulting market instability. Victoria's mask of calm finally cracked. She slammed her hand flat on the table, the sharp sound echoing in the silent room. This is an outrage. This is a neighborhood matter being twisted by a disgruntled resident. This child is willing to destroy a 9-figure contract, a cornerstone of our Q4 strategy, because her feelings were hurt at a potluck. It's an act of petulant community vandalism. She was good. She was reframing the narrative, painting me as an unstable, emotional woman lashing out. A familiar and effective trope in rooms like this. I saw a flicker of doubt in the eyes of one of the board members. The attorney leaned forward, his focus entirely on corporate liability. Ms. Quinn, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. This recording is compelling, but the voice is unidentified. Can you definitively prove the source of this external manipulation originated from or was directed by Harrington Landscaping? This was the question I had anticipated. This was the moment to hold back. I had to let them see the cliff before I pushed Victoria over it. The evidence proves that the attack was carried out by a party with a deep vested interest in Harrington's success, I replied, choosing my words with care. A definitive causal link is still being established based on the available data. I was telling the truth, but not the whole truth. Elaine Morton, the CEO, had been watching the exchange like a hawk. She had seen my evidence, heard Victoria's theatrical outburst, and registered my carefully worded, lawyerly response. She turned her sharp gaze from me to Victoria. "Victoria," she said, her tone suddenly glacial. "You hold an advisory position with Harrington. You have a declared financial interest in their success. Are you telling this board you have no knowledge of this situation?" Victoria scoffed. A short, dismissive sound. She spread her hands in a gesture of presidential helplessness. "Knowledge of what?" "That my resident is buckling under pressure and making reckless accusations. Yes, I have knowledge of that. I am here tonight not as a consultant, Elaine, but as a concerned president, and frankly a deeply disappointed one." She delivered the lines with the practiced ease of a master manipulator. She was Victoria Kane, the matriarch, the titan being forced to witness the unfortunate unraveling of her own resident. It was a masterful performance, and it was her final fatal mistake. She had just lied to the CEO and the entire board. I took a slow breath, letting her words hang in the air, letting them be absorbed by everyone at the table. I saw her husband close his eyes for a fraction of a second. He knew what was coming. I turned my full attention to the head of the table. "Madam CEO, Madam Chair," I said, my voice respectful but firm. "Ms. Kane has raised the question of my state of mind. With your permission, I request an additional 90 seconds of your time. I have one final piece of evidence that I believe will provide the necessary clarity for this board to make its decision." No one refused. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the climate control system. Victoria stared at me, a sudden cold uncertainty dawning in her eyes. She had no idea what was coming next. She had played her queen. She didn't realize my pawn had become a queen. I did not move. I did not react to Victoria's performance. I simply held the gaze of the CEO and the audit chair, my expression one of calm professional resolve. The 90 seconds they had granted me was a courtesy. I knew I would only need 20. Without breaking eye contact, I turned my attention to my laptop. My fingers moved with practiced economy. I opened a new email draft. The action was projected onto the main screen for all to see. The composition window was a stark white rectangle against the dark, stormy backdrop of the neighborhood. To the attorney, the audit chair, the CEO, CC, the external counsel. Subject: supplemental evidence. Landscaping R12 trigger. There was a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. The inclusion of the external counsel's name on the CC line was a quiet escalation, a clear signal that this was moving beyond the boundaries of an internal dispute. I typed a single sentence in the body of the email. Please find a direct live mirror of the relevant timestamped evidence at the link below. I pasted a hyperlink. It was a secure, encrypted viewing portal that Parker had established. Then, with a quiet click of the trackpad, I hit send. For a moment, nothing happened. Then small chimes and vibrations echoed softly around the marble table as the email arrived on the board members' phones and tablets. The attorney was the first to tap the link on his device. On the main screen, I mirrored my own phone, which now showed the video file loading. The screen flickered to life. The image was perfectly stable, the audio chillingly clear. It was the view from the small table at the Riverlight Cafe. My own face was visible, composed and still. Then Victoria's face came into frame as she leaned forward. Her expression a mask of condescending magnanimity. Her voice, captured by the professional-grade microphone on my phone, filled the silent boardroom. It was not the voice of a concerned president. It was the voice of a dealmaker closing a transaction. If you step back, if you resign from the committee quietly and cite personal reasons, this whole investigation disappears. And Harrington Landscaping, they have a great deal of respect for your talents. They've authorized me to tell you that a vice president of strategy position will be made available to you. The video played on. It showed my reaction, my calculated question about the stock bet, her derisive final comment about women playing chess. But the room had stopped breathing at the word vice president. The recording ended. The screen went black. The silence that followed was a physical presence. It was a dense, heavy vacuum that sucked all the air and noise out of the room. The only sound was the relentless whispering patter of the rain against the glass. A sound that had been background noise but was now amplified to a deafening degree. In that profound quiet, a tiny sharp sound cracked the stillness. Click. It was the cap of her husband's expensive fountain pen slipping from his trembling fingers and hitting the polished black marble of the table. It was the sound of a carefully constructed world shattering. He did not move to pick it up. His eyes were wide, fixed on the black screen. His face a pale mask of horror. He had heard the words. There was no ambiguity. There was no room for his alchemy. No way to spin this insult into a motivational tool. It was a bribe. It was a crime. I clicked my remote and the final slide of my presentation appeared on the screen. It was not an image but text. A direct quotation from the contract they had all signed. Appendix R12 Section 3.2 Trigger Conditions. External manipulation shall be understood to include, but is not limited to, any attempt to compromise the professional standing of an HOA employee with system oversight through fraudulent communications, or the offer of undue advantage from a party or related party with a vested vendor interest. My voice cut through the silence as sharp and precise as a scalpel. The offer of a vice presidency at Harrington Landscaping, the primary beneficiary of the removal of the Riskgate Protocol, constitutes a direct and unambiguous offer of undue advantage. The attorney looked from the screen to me. The doubt was gone. His expression was now one of cold legal fury. He had been manipulated. The community had been exposed. He gave a single sharp nod. The conditions are met, he stated, his voice flat. The clause is live. That was my cue. I moved my cursor to a small custom-built application icon on my desktop. It was an icon I had created 3 months ago, a dead man's switch I hoped I would never have to use. The label beneath it read simply execute R12. I clicked it. A small progress bar appeared on my screen, filling from left to right over the course of 3 seconds. Executing. Sent confirmed. What was that? Elaine Morton asked. Her eyes narrowed. That, I replied, was the automated notification system built into the clause. As of 5 seconds ago, an email was sent from my office to the leadership of Harrington informing them that the reverse exposure clause has been triggered due to a confirmed act of external manipulation by an agent of a competing vendor. A second email has been sent to our internal compliance department formally opening a non-discretionary investigation. Per the terms of the contract, all cross-penalty provisions are now in effect, and any and all vendors associated with the manipulating party are suspended from all current and future bidding processes with Pinecrest pending regulatory review. I had not raised my voice. I had not used a single adjective. I had simply recited the contractual consequences of Victoria's actions. I had read her suburban death sentence. Elaine Morton absorbed the information, her face hardening into a mask of pure cold command. The time for deliberation was over. The time for damage control had begun. She looked past Victoria as if she were no longer there and spoke to the attorney. Suspend Harrington from all active vendor lists. Effective immediately. Freeze all pending payments. I want a preliminary report on our legal exposure by midnight and file the initial report with the regulators first thing in the morning. I want us to be the ones breaking this story, not them. Victoria shot to her feet, her chair scraping violently against the floor. The mask of the elder stateswoman was gone, ripped away to reveal the raw, desperate fury beneath. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and rage. She pointed a trembling finger at me. Mara, what have you done? Her voice was a raw cry, the sound of a queen who had just watched her own pawn topple her throne. She wasn't speaking to a board member or a resident. She was speaking to her favorite neighbor, a last desperate appeal to a loyalty she herself had just annihilated. I stood up to face her. The vast polished table, a chasm between us. I felt a strange, unnerving calm settle over me. For the first time in my life, I was not afraid of her. I was not intimidated. I was not seeking her approval. I was simply seeing her for what she was. My job, Victoria, I said, my voice quiet. Yet it carried across the silent room. I measure risk. I identify it. I quantify it. And I mitigate it. Today, the greatest single point of risk to this community's integrity, its market value, and its contractual obligations is you. As I spoke, a familiar vibration came from the phone in my pocket. I knew without looking that it was Parker. A single line of text glowed on the lock screen. Tracks queued. Play. He was ready to play my victory song. The 90 seconds they granted me felt like an eternity in the suspended silence of the boardroom under the cold, unblinking gaze of the CEO. I turned not to argue or plead but to my laptop. My movements were deliberate, stripped of all hesitation. This was not a performance. It was a procedure. I did not speak. I simply acted on the main screen for all to see. I opened a secure messaging application and sent a single pre-written command to Parker. Initiate live mirror authorization, Quinn 734. A moment later, a hyperlink appeared in my inbox. I drafted a new email. The recipient list identical to the last. The CEO, the audit chair, the attorney, and the indispensable external counsel. The subject line was stark. Final evidence. R12 trigger. The body contained only the link. I hit send. Around the table, phones and tablets chimed softly. A discordant chorus in the feral quiet. I projected my own screen, which now showed a secure portal loading. Then the video began. The bright, airy ambience of the Riverlight Cafe filled the screen. A jarring contrast to the dark, rain-lashed boardroom. There was Victoria leaning in. her face a mask of magnanimous power, and then her voice captured in perfect damning clarity spoke the words that sealed her fate. If you step back, resign from the committee quietly. Harrington Landscaping authorized me to tell you that a vice president of strategy position will be made available to you. The video ended, plunging the screen back into blackness. The silence that followed was absolute, a physical weight that pressed down on the room. It was as if the floor-to-ceiling glass had been evacuated of all air, sound, and life. In that profound void, a single sharp sound cracked the stillness. Click. Her husband's hand, resting on the polished marble, had gone limp. The cap from his pen had slipped from his fingers and fallen to the table. It was the only thing in the room that dared to move. His face was ashen. His eyes fixed on the black screen as if he had just witnessed a public execution. I broke the silence. With a tap on my remote, I replaced the black screen with a stark white slide. On it, in large black unavoidable text, were the words from the contract itself. Appendix R12 Section 3.2 Trigger conditions the offer of undue advantage from a party or related party with a vested vendor interest. I let the words hang in the air for a full 5 seconds. I did not need to interpret them. They were a self-executing statement of fact. The attorney slowly lifted his gaze from his tablet and looked at me. His face was a grim, stony mask. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. The conditions to trigger have been met, he stated. His voice devoid of all emotion. It was not an opinion. It was a legal conclusion. That was all I needed. My cursor moved to a small icon on my desktop. An icon I had designed myself. It was a simple gray square with the letters R12 inside. It was my button. I clicked it once. On the screen, a small window popped up. It was a simple script confirmation. Initiating automated R12 protocol. Sending notification to Harrington Legal. Sent. Sending notification to Pinecrest Compliance. Sent. Logging irreversible action to audit chain. Confirmed. Protocol complete. The entire process took less than 5 seconds. The gears of the trap had been sprung. The automated emails, legally binding and timestamped, were already in the inboxes of our largest vendor and our own internal watchdogs. The contract had been weaponized. The cross-penalty clauses were active. Harrington Landscaping was for all intents and purposes dead to Pinecrest. Elaine Morton, the CEO, did not flinch. She had watched the entire sequence unfold with the icy calm of a battlefield commander. Now that the bomb had been detonated, she moved to contain the blast. Her voice was sharp. A series of rapid-fire commands. Attorney, suspend Harrington from all bids active and pending, effective immediately. Audit chair, I want a full audit of every interaction we've had with them in the last 2 quarters and get our PR team on the line. We control this narrative starting now. File the preliminary report with the regulator by 9 a.m. tomorrow. It was then that Victoria finally broke. She shot to her feet, her chair screeching backward. The sound a raw violation of the room's controlled atmosphere. The mask of the benevolent president, the concerned neighbor, the elder stateswoman. It was all gone, burned away to reveal the white-hot rage of a queen who had been checkmated by a pawn. Mara, she roared, her voice cracking. She pointed a shaking finger at me across the vast expanse of the marble table. What have you done? It was the cry of a woman who could not comprehend her own defeat. She was not asking for information. She was demanding a reversal, a return to the world where she made the rules and I followed them. I rose slowly to my feet, facing her directly. The storm raged outside, but in here there was only a dead cold calm. I did my job, I said, my voice quiet, but it cut through her anger like a shard of glass. I am the director of risk. My job is to identify threats to this community. It is to analyze them, and it is to neutralize them. I held her gaze, refusing to look away. Today I finished. The risk was you. At that exact moment I felt a vibration against my hip, my phone in my pocket. I knew what it was. I didn't need to look down. Parker's message would be glowing on the screen. Tracks cued. Play. The war was over. It was time for the music. The rain against the glass was the only sound. a steady liquid percussion that seemed to be counting the seconds of Victoria's downfall. Outside, the storm was washing the neighborhood clean. Inside, a different kind of storm had just broken, and it was washing away a lifetime of lies. I reached into my pocket and discreetly slipped a single wireless earbud into my left ear. A moment later, a ghost of a melody began to play so faint that only I could hear it. It was Parker's music, a simple searching piano line, each note falling with the clarity of a drop of water into a still pool. It wasn't a song of triumph. It was a song of release. I could feel it in my chest, a gentle, insistent pressure, as if the music were physically untangling a knot that had been cinched tight for 34 years. Victoria remained standing, a statue of impotent rage. Her mouth was a thin white line. She was a woman who had always had the last word, and she had just been rendered speechless. The power had shifted so completely, so irrevocably, that the air in the room felt ionized, charged with a new and unfamiliar polarity. It was her husband who moved first. He leaned toward me, not across the table, but into the small space between our chairs, a space that had been a demilitarized zone for most of my adult life. His whisper was a desperate hiss. The creed he had lived by, the fundamental law of his universe. Mara, he breathed, his eyes wide with a terror that was both for me and for her. You've done this to your president. She will not forgive this. Forgiveness. It was the currency of our neighborhood. The coin Victoria dispensed and withheld to maintain her power. It was the thing I had been taught to beg for after every perceived transgression, every moment of independence that she had framed as an act of rebellion. I turned my head slowly and looked at him. Truly looked at him, perhaps for the first time, without the filter of a resident's need. I saw not a co-conspirator but a long-term captive, a man who had mistaken the walls of his prison for the foundations of a home. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I said, my voice low and even devoid of the anger he expected. I'm asking to be right. The distinction was lost on him, but it was everything to me. Forgiveness lived in the murky realm of emotion and obligation. Right lived in the clear, clean world of data and fact. I had chosen my world. The piano in my ear played a quiet ascending arpeggio, and for a breath I felt a strange, weightless peace. The spell was broken by Elaine Morton. The CEO's focus had already moved on from the neighborhood drama to corporate triage. Her sharp eyes were fixed on me, not with anger but with a cold, piercing appraisal. She was calculating her own risk now, and I was the primary variable. Mara, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. Let's be clear. You understand that by triggering this clause you have lit a fuse. You've potentially pulled Pinecrest and every person at this table into a media firestorm. Are you prepared for that? It was a test, a final one. Was I merely an instrument of vengeance, or did I understand the consequences of the war I had started? Yes, Madam CEO, I am, I replied. I held her gaze, letting her see the conviction there. A storm is destructive, but it's also clarifying. When a storm tears through a forest, it's the dead branches that fall. It's the hollow trees that are uprooted. The healthy with the strong roots, they remain. The storm reveals the true shape of the forest. A flicker of something, respect, perhaps, passed through her eyes. I had not only accepted the consequences, I had framed them as a necessary cleansing act. The audit chair, who had been silent until now, turned her severe grandmotherly gaze upon Victoria. She was still standing, a pillar of silent fury. Ms. Kane, she said, her tone formal and laced with ice. In light of this new evidence, this board asks you again, do you have anything you wish to declare regarding your advisory position and financial interests with Harrington Landscaping? This was the final nail. It was a procedural question, a box to be checked, but it was also a public humiliation. It was her last chance to fall on her sword, to offer a shred of contrition. She said nothing. Her face, which had been pale, seemed to drain of all remaining color, leaving a waxy gray pallor. Her jaw was clenched so tightly that a muscle jumped along her cheek. Her right hand, which had been hanging at her side, rose slowly and clutched the lapel of her expensive suit vest. Her knuckles were white for a terrifying second. I thought she was having a heart attack, but then I saw her thumb and forefinger pinch the fabric, twisting it, as if she were trying to rip the designer's label from the lining. She was trying to tear off the very identity that had just cost her everything. She was a woman trying to claw her way out of her own skin. She had given her answer in her silence. The board had seen it, but the execution was not yet complete. She had been exposed as a corporate saboteur, a manipulator, a liar. I was about to expose her as a common criminal. With everyone's attention fixed on Victoria's silent collapse, I performed one last quiet action at my laptop. I attached a final file to the email chain, the one I had held in reserve for this exact moment. It was a single devastating document. I hit send. "There is one more thing," I said, my voice drawing every eye back to me. "A final piece of data for the audit committee's consideration." On the screen, I displayed the document. It was a verified trading summary from a brokerage house showing the recent activity of the Kane Family Trust, an entity Victoria controlled completely. The summary showed that just last week, within 48 hours of the anonymous email being sent to the treasurer, the trust had taken out a massive short position against the landscaping stock. It was a multi-million-dollar bet that the company's share price was about to fall. The timing wasn't just suspicious. It was a confession written in the language Victoria understood best: money. She hadn't just tried to get me removed to help a partner company. She had tried to get me removed to deliberately tank the stock so she could profit from the wreckage. She had committed securities fraud. The room, which had been quiet, now became something else. The very air seemed to grow thick and heavy. The low, almost subliminal hum of the building's climate control, a sound I had never consciously noticed before, seemed to suddenly fall away. The world went completely, profoundly silent. The rain, the neighborhood, the people at the table, they all disappeared. There was only the pressurized stillness, the silent accusation of the document glowing on the screen, and the sound of my own heart beating a steady, measured, and finally liberated rhythm in the quiet. The document glowed on the screen, a silent, irrefutable confession. The air in the room, already thin, seemed to vanish altogether. This was no longer about a broken contract or a vengeful president. This was about a calculated criminal conspiracy to defraud a publicly traded company and its shareholders. The expressions on the faces of the board members shifted from clinical concern to something harder, colder. They were no longer adjudicating a neighborhood dispute. They were standing on the edge of a legal abyss. And Victoria had just shown them the way down. Elaine Morton, the CEO, rose to her feet. The movement was slow, deliberate, drawing every eye. She did not look at Victoria. She had ceased to exist for her. Her gaze was fixed on the members of her board, her tribunal. She was no longer asking questions. She was rendering a verdict and demanding their allegiance. "We have a decision to make," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, a blade of pure steel. "It is no longer a question of one resident's conduct. It is a question of this community's survival. The choice is binary. Option 1, we reinstate Ms. Quinn to her full duties. We turn over every piece of evidence presented tonight to the District Attorney's Office and the SEC, and we launch a full external criminal investigation. Option 2, we continue Ms. Quinn's suspension indefinitely and handle this matter internally." She paused, letting the weight of the second, unspoken option settle in the room. To handle it internally was to become complicit. It was to bury a crime. It was community suicide on a 20-minute delay. "All those in favor of option 1, she commanded, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "Reinstate Ms. Quinn and open an external investigation." Show of hands. Elaine Morton's own hand shot up instantly, a declaration. Then the audit chair, her face a mask of grim duty, raised hers. The attorney's hand followed his gesture, sharp and decisive. One by one around the long marble table, the hands went up, 7 of them. They were not just voting for me. They were voting to save themselves, to cauterize the wound Victoria had inflicted before the infection could spread. The room was a sea of raised hands, a silent testament to the absolute totality of my victory. There was only one hand that remained down, my own. I kept my hands folded on the table before me. I abstained. This was never about my reinstatement. It was about the integrity of the system. My role was to present the data. Their role was to act on it. By removing myself from the vote, I made their decision pure, untainted by my personal stake. It was their choice, their responsibility, their act of self-preservation. Elaine Morton noted my abstention with a quick perceptive glance. The motion carries, she declared. 7 in favor, none opposed, 1 abstention. She turned her gaze to the attorney. Attorney, the press release goes out in 20 minutes. It will state that Pinecrest has uncovered evidence of external corporate sabotage, that we are cooperating fully with law enforcement, and that as a result our relationship with Harrington Landscaping and all of its known affiliates has been terminated, permanently banned. The word was a gavel strike, an epitaph. It echoed in the silent room, the final irrevocable end to Victoria's legacy in this world. It was that word, permanently, that finally broke her. She moved with a speed that was shocking in a woman her age. She launched herself from her chair and lunged not toward the CEO but toward me. She rounded the table in 3 long strides, her face a contorted mask of pure primal rage. The security guard by the door tensed, but Victoria ignored him. She stopped just short of me, her body blocking my view of the room, creating a suffocating private space of pure menace. She leaned down, her face inches from mine, and her whisper was more violent than any shout. "You are my resident," she hissed, the words hot and venomous. "You are my resident." It was her last card, her final desperate appeal to the one law she thought was immutable, the law of the tribe of the neighborhood. She was reminding me that we were connected, that her shame was my shame, that her fall was my fall. She believed residency was a bond that could not be broken, a shield that could not be pierced. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice. I met her furious gaze with the same cold calm I had maintained all night. I let her see the absolute absence of fear in my eyes. "Residency isn't a passport," I replied, my own voice a whisper. "It doesn't grant you immunity." For a moment I thought she might strike me. I saw the impulse flicker in her eyes, a raw, violent need to physically destroy the thing she could no longer control. But she didn't. Instead, something behind her gave way. It was her husband. He had scurried after her, a step behind as always. His hand, small and trembling, shot out and latched onto the sleeve of her suit jacket. "Victoria, no," he pleaded, his voice a thin, terrified thread. "Not here, please." And for the first time I saw true fear in his eyes. It was not the polite social fear of embarrassment or a scene. It was a raw animal terror. The fear of a zookeeper who has just realized the lion has gotten out of its cage and he has no idea how to get it back in. The system he had managed his entire life, the system of polite smiles and gentle mediations and quiet influence, had just catastrophically failed. His wife was no longer a powerful woman to be managed. She was a cornered animal, and he was terrified of what she might do. She allowed herself to be pulled back, not by his strength, but by the sudden crushing realization that she had no moves left. She stumbled back a step, her eyes still locked on mine, filled with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. My phone vibrated in my pocket, a gentle, insistent buzz against my leg. I broke eye contact with Victoria and pulled it out. A single line of text from Parker. "Extremely proud. Come to my place." It was a lifeline. A doorway out of this suffocating room and into a new world. It was a simple declarative statement of a bond that was not about obligation or power but about choice. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. My business here was done. I pushed my chair back, the sound scraping softly on the floor. I stood up. I did not look at Victoria again. I did not look at her husband. I walked my steps even and measured past the board members, past the CEO, toward the tall glass door that led out of the conference room. My hand closed around the cold steel handle. I turned it, pulled, and the heavy door swung inward. The room's ventilation system was connected to an external air intake near the door. As it opened, a gust of cool, damp night air rushed into the sterile, climate-controlled room. It was thick with the smell of rain and wet pavement and ozone. The smell of the real world. It was an air I hadn't breathed in years. A different atmosphere entirely from the recycled, filtered air of the glass tower. It felt like the first breath after being underwater for a very, very long time. Felt like freedom. I did not watch them escort Victoria from the room. I did not need to. Her power had been predicated on the illusion of control. And with that illusion shattered, she was just a woman in an expensive suit. Suddenly and irrevocably irrelevant. I remained standing by the open door, letting the cool, rain-scented air wash over me, a baptism into a new reality. The board members began to disperse, gathering their things in a charged silence, their movements stiff and formal. They avoided my gaze not out of hostility but out of a kind of community reverence. I was no longer just the director of risk. I was the system's immune response, a living, breathing demonstration of the neighborhood's will to survive. I was a force they now had to reckon with. My phone chimed, a polite, professional sound that cut through the lingering tension. It was an email from the head of public relations, a woman I had only met twice. The subject line was blunt. Draft for approval. Harrington release. I opened the document. The text was cold, clinical, and beautiful in its brutal efficiency. For immediate release. Pinecrest Estates announced today that it has activated a contractual non-compliance clause, specifically Appendix R12, following the discovery of a targeted campaign of external corporate sabotage. As a result, the community has ceased all current and pending interactions with Harrington Landscaping and its known affiliates effective immediately. Pinecrest has proactively opened a channel of cooperation with the relevant regulatory and law enforcement agencies to ensure a full and transparent investigation into the matter. Pinecrest is committed to upholding the highest standards of community integrity and will pursue all available legal avenues to protect the neighborhood and its residents. At the bottom of the draft was a small highlighted box for my approval. Authorized for release by, followed by a blank space. I tapped the box and a digital signature prompt appeared. My fingers typed the two letters that had once been a legacy I carried but were now entirely my own. MQ. I hit send. The deed was done. Not just in the boardroom but in the permanent, unforgiving ledger of public record. Director Quinn. The voice belonged to Elaine Morton. I turned from the doorway. She was standing beside the great marble table. Her expression as unyielding as the stone itself. She had already put the crisis behind her. Her mind was on the next move, the cleanup, the rebuilding. Tomorrow morning at 8, she said, her voice a command, not a request. I want you to lead the comprehensive overhaul of the vendor stream. I want a full diagnostic, a clean implementation, and a report on my desk by end of day. You have full authority. It was not a reward. It was not an apology for the community's doubt. It was a promotion born of necessity. She was handing me the keys to the kingdom I had just saved, charging me with rebuilding the very gates I had designed. It was the ultimate acknowledgement, a grant of power that was more meaningful than any title or raise. It was a statement of trust. I gave a single sharp nod. I reached into my pocket and my fingers closed around the small plastic clicker I had used for my presentation. It felt heavy, a spent weapon. I slid it back into the depths of my pocket. My work in this room was finished. I turned and walked out of the conference room, leaving the remnants of my old life behind me. The executive lobby was empty, the thick carpet swallowing the sound of my footsteps. I walked toward the wall of glass that overlooked the neighborhood drawn to the storm. And there she was, Victoria. She was standing on the other side of the glass on an outdoor observation deck that was closed to visitors at this hour. She must have been escorted out this way. The rain was falling harder now, plastering her silver hair to her scalp, soaking the shoulders of her $1,000 suit. She wasn't looking at the neighborhood. She was looking in, staring at me through the rain-streaked window. Her rage was gone, replaced by a hollow, gaping emptiness. The lights of the lobby reflected off the glass, making her seem translucent, a ghost haunting the second floor. She was a queen locked out of her own castle. A woman from another time. A guest whose welcome had been violently, permanently revoked. She looked for the first time in her life small. My phone buzzed again, this time with the familiar, insistent rhythm of a FaceTime call. The screen lit up with Parker's name. I answered it, my thumb steady. His face filled the screen, framed by the warm, chaotic comfort of his studio. He wasn't smiling. His expression was intense, searching. He wasn't asking if I had won. He was asking if I had survived. The sound of his music, the same simple, searching piano melody from before, was louder now. No longer a secret in my ear, but the soundtrack of the room he was in. Can you hear it, Mara? He asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. The question was not about the volume. It was about everything. Could I hear the sound of the chains breaking? Could I hear the silence where Victoria's lectures used to be? Could I hear the first notes of a life that was finally entirely my own? The music began to swell. The simple piano line joined by a rising tide of strings, the melody blossoming from a question into a declaration. It was the sound of a knot untying, of a weight lifting, of a long-held breath being released into the clean, rain-washed air. I looked away from Victoria's ghostly image in the glass. I looked away from the neighborhood lights that had once seemed so distant and unattainable. I looked directly into the camera, directly into my brother's eyes, and I let him see the truth on my face. It was not the face of a victor. It was not the face of a survivor. It was simply my face stripped of all the old roles, free of all the old fears. I hear it, I said softly. My voice was quiet, but it was my own. The screen goes black. My face is the last thing you see. I am no longer invisible. There is nothing more to explain. Thank you so much for listening to the story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from. So please drop a comment below to connect and share your thoughts. If you enjoyed this, I'd be so grateful if you would subscribe to the channel, like this video, and give it a little extra support by hitting that hype button. Truly helps this story get heard by so many more people.